means that the number one pick in the 2021 NBA draft goes to the Detroit Pistons.
Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft? Who's got the number one pick in this year's draft?
Basketball!
Select Isaiah Stewart.
The Detroit Pistons select Killian Hayes.
Saddiq, that was absolutely sensational.
I don't know what went into that process. I met the criteria to be selected, but I wasn't.
From long range. Oh! Yes!
Detroit basketball! Pistons fans, welcome back to another edition of the Palace of Pistons Podcast, part of the Believe Network. I'm your host, Mike Anguilano, and joining me, as always, are my co-hosts, Jasper Apollonia and Aaron Johnson. Fellas, how are we doing? I don't know about you, but I was blown everywhere outside. It's actually crazy.
Wow, congratulations, Mike.
We need a proper tag for that.
Wait, is it be after dark?
Yeah, no, this wind is it's brutal out here in New York as well. That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Right, wind. Wait,
Yeah,
what are you guys talking about?
The wind is it's blustery out here in New York as well. Yeah, I'm doing great, Mike. You say as always, but having all three of us on the podcast is definitely not an as always thing, as some of our commenters are more than happy to point out to us. But yes, we are all together today. I'm very happy for it. We got a lot of stuff to talk about, so I'm ready to get into it whenever you guys are.
Yeah, no, I mean it's a treat to have everyone here. I'm a little afraid going into each podcast now because the comments on YouTube just get more and more vicious each week, each passing week. So, I'm afraid to really give my opinion at this point because I feel like people are about to start threatening our lives. But hey, I'm gonna do it anyway. So
I think that means we've made it.
It very well could, because people do not like when they disagree with our opinions.
Do we really make it as a podcast if our lives aren't threatened on YouTube? I don't know. I think that box has to be checked off before we can say we've made it.
That's a good point. Yeah, until you have your first assassination attempt against you, you're nobody. That's what they always say.
That's exactly right.
Who was it that said that? Ronald Reagan? I can't remember.
It could very well have been Ronald Reagan. But this isn't a political podcast. This is a Pistons podcast. And actually, before we get into things, I want to give a right up front plug for another Palace of Pistons podcast in our podcast network that we're creating within a network. And that is Palace of Pistons After Dark, which had its first episode launch. And Jasper, you've had the pleasure of being on that podcast and being with Tim and Czar. What is that like?
Oh, well, I mean, it's me uncensored, so it can only be disastrous. No, it's
au contraire.
It's a lot of fun, man. I really love what we're doing over with Palace Pistons After Dark. It's a totally different vibe from this show. Really different topics, really different presentation. Big shout out to Tim, big shout out to Aaron as well. It's a lot of fun. So I hope that anybody who's listening to us here, they give us a listen at Palace Pistons After Dark. And you know what? If you hate what we're doing here, give Palace of Pistons After Dark a listen anyway, because like I said, it's a totally different thing. So if we're not your flavor of ice cream, maybe a different store will give you something a little bit better. So here we go. Yeah, give us a listen. Going to be on our Spotify, going to be on our YouTube channel. So easy to find. Give us a listen, give us a follow. I'm really looking forward to what we're going to have coming down the pipe. We just had another podcast recorded today, and we had a lot of laughs on there. So I'm looking forward to that one coming out as well.
Yeah, it kind of feels like Mike and I are being put out the pasture. The kids have grown up, and they're the new flavor. And I know everyone's gonna love that podcast because Jasper's spot on. It's completely different. Tim came to me with that idea, and I just knew right away it was something we had to do. And he's kind of the perfect mind to help lead it. It is a lot more uncensored. It's different topics, crazier topics. I'd say this is more of the analysis focused podcast with objective opinions about current stuff going on with the Pistons. And that podcast is just guys being dudes, making jokes, having fun, talking about basketball, talking about the Pistons, in a more raunchier way. But it's good stuff. The first episode was great, and I've only heard good things about the second recording that took place earlier. Was supposed to make an appearance, but unfortunately, I was not able to. Well, probably fortunately for the listeners at this point, because it does feel like people are tired of hearing me talk about the Pistons, but I'm here anyway to do it on this show.
Aaron, they're probably
our final episode before all the cool kids just start listening to that, and
that's right.
And I are done.
They're probably tired of hearing me talk too, but that hasn't stopped me. So I wouldn't let you stop you either. What can we put any bets on who's first to crack of the OG podcast? I don't know. I think there's a good chance it might be me, but we'll see.
well, if it were possible to make a bet like that, I'm sure all of us would be using our sponsor for today, and that's BetOnline. And basketball is back, and BetOnline remains your number one source for all your sports betting needs this season. You'll always find the latest odds, team matchup info, player news, and game trends over at BetOnline. And as your continued source for all sports wagering information, BetOnline features live betting, free contests, and giveaways all season long. Always the fastest and easiest way to bet all your favorite sports and events, whether that's the NFL, the NBA, NHL, MMA, tennis, boxing, or even golf. Head on over to betonline.ag to join and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Again, 50% welcome bonus for your first deposit. Use our promo code BLEAV. That's BLEAV. Once again, that's BLEAV. Receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit at betonline.ag. BetOnline, where the game starts. We haven't had a podcast all together, but Jasper and I still in sync, throwing up lobs and me throwing it down.
Mm-hmm. That's the ad read equivalent of the Dwayne Wade LeBron James picture.
That's exactly right.
That's right.
That's exactly right. I'll be Bron. Okay. So guys, let's get right into Pistons talk. We do have some interesting things to talk about. And for our first topic of today, we have to talk about Saddiq Bey. And, I had put this in the group chat yesterday. I don't know if Aaron used that as a little bit of momentum to get this into the podcast, but Saddiq has been moved to the bench in favor of Isaiah Livers. Livers started at the 2 yesterday against the New York Knicks. And Saddiq's just been cold. He's in one of those spells. We know he's a very streaky player, but he's shooting just about 40% from the field, 27% from deep. Overall, his stats are down across the board year over year. His assist rate is a lot lower. His turnover percentage is currently a career high, despite having nearly identical usage. So, guys, we talked about this coming into the season. Saddiq Bey was one of those players where the Pistons really needed to evaluate how he fits with Cade Cunningham, how he fits with Jaden Ivey, what sort of progress he has made on the offensive side of the ball. We know he's a good shooter, but what else can he provide? And he's going to be a restricted free agent this upcoming. He won't be this upcoming offseason, but the summer after that. But he's going to be due for an extension, and the Pistons are going to have to make a decision on that fairly soon. So he's still young. I know he's old for being young, if that makes any sense, being a multi-year college player, but we've already seen some articles come out about the Pistons feeling around if they can find a trade. Some teams have inquired to Detroit about him, trying to acquire him. And we know the Pistons are open for business on a couple of different fronts. We've heard that with Bojan Bogdanovic. Aaron and I touched on that last week. But Saddiq Bey is a little bit different. He's younger. He was part of the quote-unquote rebuild. He was one of the first picks out of that rebuild. Was he not the pick for Luke Kennard in that trade on draft night?
Yes.
Okay. So, you have that attachment. Some people care about that. I don't necessarily, because that's a sunk cost at this point. But do you think the Pistons should be looking to move Saddiq Bey? Is this a good thing that they are doing? To me, I think it's a little bit okay. I think it's a little soon as well because, again, this team is incomplete. Cade's hurt. Jaden Ivey's been hurt. So it's incomplete. It's hard to judge. But do you think the Pistons should be looking to move on from him first? Before we talk about value, do you think that it's the right thing to start to plan an exit course for Saddiq Bey if you know for a fact that you're not going to pay him?
Look, in the first things first, our wonderful listeners who are always right have made it very, very clear that Saddiq Bey is a very good young player. They feel he is a very important piece of this Pistons core. But, and I know that this will, cause a stir. Saddiq Bey has seemingly regressed at each year. He had a good rookie season, trended downward sophomore year, and is at a point where he's not even in the starting lineup anymore. The team has seemingly lost all faith in him. And I can't necessarily blame them. This is a guy that he literally has regressed statistically each season he's been in the league. And this year, going into the season, we talked about it's a big year for Saddiq Bey. He's going to have to figure out how he's going to contribute with another high usage guard coming into the fold in Jaden Ivey. He's going to have to figure out how to play alongside Bojan Bogdanovic, another guy that's going to take shots, that's going to be a scoring threat, that's going to be a big part of the offense. And he hasn't. And then when Cade Cunningham's missed time, Jaden Ivey's missed time, Saddiq Bey, it's not like those numbers for him, have shot up. And it's like, okay, he's just struggling to fit in with these new guys. They're still learning how to play together. It's just not been the case. Saddiq Bey's just struggling to play well altogether in any facet right now. And, Jasper, I know you tweeted the other day during the Knicks game, like, I don't think Saddiq Bey even thinks he's a threat from beyond the arc. And, he's not. Like, he gained this reputation in his rookie season as a marksman three-point shooter because he was taking, 7.5 threes a game. And, he shot 36% or whatever it was from the three-point line. And, like, that was good. Like, it was encouraging. The Pistons needed some shooting, and it looked like they added that in the draft. But last year, he regressed as a shooter. This year, he's shooting 27% from the three-point line in 19 games. Like, he's just not a shooter at this point. We can't keep giving him that reputation as a shooter because he hasn't been one for the last season and a half now. And you look at what else he's done to his game. He's gotten better as an inside scorer, but it's not like he's a great enough threat inside to make up for what he's taking away from the team with his inability to space the floor. He has regressed as a distributor, something that he actually did show growth at last year. The ball was put in his hands, and he contributed at a higher level, making moves with the ball, passing the ball, specifically towards the second half, in the second half of last season. But this year, Mike, as you mentioned, a very, very similar usage rate, yet the turnover percentage has gone up and the assist percentage has gone down. He's not creating at that same level. And Bey's never quite been the defender that's been hoped of, for a guy of his build and his athleticism. So it puts Detroit in a very tough situation because he had such a promising rookie year. He made the all-rookie team. There was a lot to like about his rookie season. But I think you have to look at the face value of what he's now been for, last season and the first 20 games of this year, and he just hasn't been good enough. So, when you're talking about having to make a decision about his contract, he's going to be a restricted free agent next summer. You have to figure out, do you want to pay him? Do you want to give him that second contract? And Pistons don't sign a lot of guys to second contracts. A lot of these rookies, they just have not in, the last decade or whatever. So you're talking about committing what will probably double-digit $1 million on an annual average. And do the Pistons want to do that for a guy that, let's face it, statistically has gotten worse each season in the league? I think the Pistons are right to be opening themselves up to moving him. I don't think it's a great time to be doing it, considering his value is probably at his lowest point that it's been so far in his career. But I do think the Pistons have to start doing their due diligence because it's not looking great in Saddiq Bey land right now.
No, Aaron, I mean, it simply isn't. And you've hit on a lot of the things right here. But the fact of the matter is he's just not shooting well. And we're up to a point right now where over his last 713 three-point attempts, he's shooting 33% from three. He's just not shooting well. And even more so than that, like he's, of course, like we've said, improved himself on the inside. He is shooting 52% from 2-point range this year, which is a huge improvement over his previous mark. So I'm not giving up on Saddiq Bey totally. I don't think he is a waste of a player. I don't think he's a waste of a roster spot. I am very much okay with moving on from him, though. If the price is right, absolutely. I think there is definitely a role for him on this roster, but is it as a starter long-term? I'm not sold on that, especially with what we're seeing in terms of his shooting right now, in terms of his confidence from outside right now. I basically only see him as a guy coming off the bench that can really give you good numbers for your second unit if you're like a championship contender. I look at him like he's like a Marcus Morris type, except Marcus Morris can actually shoot. He's more of like what Marcus Morris was when he was in Detroit. He's just not efficient enough to be in your starting lineup, getting a usage of 20% or higher, shooting 5+ threes a game. There's just not the space in your offense for a player like that right now, especially, and we've hit on this a lot of times, when you have other guys in Bojan Bogdanovic and Jaden Ivey and Cade Cunningham who need the ball. And look, the fact of the matter is league average of effective field goal percentage this year, 53.7%. Saddiq Bey, effective shooting percentage this year, 47%. Like, he's just not giving you efficient offense in any aspect of the game. We know about his defense. He's not a great rebounder. He's not a good enough passer. And while it looked like maybe he took some small steps forward in that department last year, he's completely regressed as a passer this year. The assist percentage is down. The turnovers are up. I don't feel comfortable when he has the ball in his hands. I don't feel comfortable if he's a catch and shoot guy. So really, as of right now, where do you see him going as an organization? I'm not quite sure. I think really at this point, the only path forward for him as a Piston is coming off of the bench. And that's good. That's fine. But when we're coming up on how much are you going to extend him based on his averages up until this point, you have to imagine that him and his representation are going to be looking for a good amount of money. I'm not sure he's worth that. Is Saddiq Bey worth $15 million a year moving forward? I know the salary cap is about to go up a little bit, but I'm really not sold as of right now. And if there still is, based on the reputation that he built for himself his first year, first year and a half, I guess, in the league, if there is a legitimate market for him, I think the Pistons absolutely should be exploring it. Because there is, there could be picks to be had, there could be players to be had, and they need to upgrade their wing position desperately. If he can be a part of that as a trade package, I'm fine with that. Go for it. But the price has to be right.
So that gets us into the discussion of price. And, I think Boston was willing to give up at least one first a couple years ago for Saddiq Bey. I don't think that would happen now. But, in terms of return value, and he is a young wing. I mean, that's the most sought after asset in the entire league. What would you guys be looking to get for Saddiq Bey at this point? Knowing that he's going to be due for a contract extension, so that's going to factor into any trade talks. And, what are you looking to get back for him? I mean, it's very tough to gauge because we've seen the highs. And he is a good shooter. He's extraordinarily streaky, which we saw. He is shooting better on twos this year, so I guess there's a little bit of diversification, but he's just not a threat from deep. As you guys said, it's a dramatic downturn. The defense has also taken a bit of a downturn. Despite his size and seeming like he has the mold to be, at least an efficient defender, not somebody that's going to get you killed. If he gets switched onto somebody, it just hasn't translated. So, what sort of value would you be looking to get for Saddiq Bey? I'm trying to look up some player comps right now to try to quiz you guys, see who you'd rather have. But I'm interested to know what you have to say about what you'd want for a young wing that still has some promise. Despite having a down year to start. And remember, Saddiq was shot very cold last year as well to start off the season. What would you guys be looking to get for him in a probably pretty active trade market? There's a lot of teams that are kind of hanging around that, they're going to fight for the play-in.
I mean, I still think you can get a pick that is somewhere around where you drafted him at, like really, really close to the lottery, but not quite. I still think you can get something in that range. It depends who is, looking to buy. And I don't think I'd give him up for anything less than that as of right now. In terms of established players, who's to say? It seems unlikely that you're going to be trading Saddiq 1-for-1. It feels like he's going to have to be part of a package if you're going to move him. Something like, him and Bojan, it seems like a natural pairing because you have a more established guy with a bigger contract, and then you have Saddiq, who's still pretty young and, potentially could still potentially add to his game. I mean, let's look, there's a lot of criticisms to be made, but he is an above average free throw shooter, not just in terms of his percentages, but in terms of getting to the line. He gets to the line pretty effectively, and he has since he was a rookie. Now that he's finishing at the rim as well, that's a skill set that absolutely matters, and is something that can help either a young team or a contender. So for me, I would be looking to, I'm not trading him for anything less than a first round pick, something that's probably going to be, somewhere in that 16 to 25 range. But I'm also certainly willing to part with him as part of a package for another player that maybe a team is looking to offload, like say a John Collins. I threw that out on the Palace of Pistons After Dark. I think Bojan Bogdanovic and Saddiq Bey for John Collins, if the Hawks are really serious about moving him, I think that's something that could potentially work for both sides. So it would be something like that.
Yeah, I think certainly that there's going to be interest in Bey, even though he's at probably his lowest value right now, just based off the way he's been playing. A team that comes to mind is a team like Phoenix, right? They have someone in Jay Crowder that they need to offload. They want to offload. They own their own first round pick. They want to get another forward that can contribute. They're down Cam Johnson for the rest of this season. Taking a flyer on a guy like Saddiq Bey, who at worst can come off the bench and give you some minutes. That makes sense for a team like Phoenix, right? I don't know necessarily how that deal gets done. I don't know if maybe there's another move where Saddiq Bey is involved in a trade with someone like Nerlens Noel or Alec Burks, two guys that I think will probably be moved at some point by Detroit this year, at least Nerlens Noel. And that doesn't mean that I personally think the Pistons should be trading someone like Alec Burks, who's clearly made a huge impact on the team in the 10 or so games that he's played in so far with the group. But that's just another way that I can see him being a part of a deal. I think you're absolutely right, Jasper. A team that's kind of middle of the pack in the playoff race, in the play-in hunt, there will be a team that ends up picking 17 through 22, 17 through 24 that I'm sure would talk themselves into moving a first round pick to get Saddiq Bey if they feel he's going to help contribute right away and give them a little bit of an extra push towards their playoff chase. And I think Saddiq Bey is still a valuable player too. I don't want everyone to think that I'm just sitting here and saying he's awful. He's not been good this year. It's okay to say that, But it's also true to say, like, he's gotten better as an inside scorer. Last year, we saw what he could do when he worked on becoming more of a distributor. Now, the second half of last season, he was getting 4 or 5 assists a game, and he was moving the ball well. So he's a guy that works so hard. You certainly don't want to give up on him. And he's only 23 years old. If he's available and teams don't have to give up a whole lot to get him, they're going to be pouncing at the bit to try to trade for him. So Detroit doesn't have to get frantic here. They don't have to rush into a move. He's still under contract through next season. Maybe he turns it around. Maybe he reinforces himself as a part of this team moving forward. And that would be great, because that was the hope when you drafted him, when he had such a successful rookie season, and after he ended last year on somewhat of a high note. So you do kind of want to try to hold out on Saddiq Bey and see if he can turn it around, because there are some really strong things that he can do, that he's capable of doing, but he just has to put it all together at once, and that's where he struggled the most. He's going to be sought after. There will be interest in him. The Pistons can get value for him, but selling low on him just to offload him when, you know, this team doesn't really have a ton of guys to take minutes from anyway right now would be a mistake, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and look, if you're a rival GM, it's so easy to talk yourself into giving up some assets for Saddiq Bey. Look, all you have to do is say, can we fix his shot? Yes? Okay, well then that's a trade worth making. Absolutely. Especially if he's going to be a restricted free agent in 2 years, and he's under contract next year still under that rookie deal. I mean, if you're an opposing GM, you look at the leaps that he's made in the interior this year, and you say, if we can get him back up to shooting 37-38% from three, that's a guy that is really, really, really useful offensively. And I still think, like, while I'm saying these are trade packages I'd be willing to look into, I'm not saying I want to trade Saddiq Bey. It's something I'm open to, but again, I think as a Pistons fan, you can still talk yourself into saying, look, if you can fix that shot, if you can get a real power forward next to him instead of Bojan Bogdanovic, who's totally overmatched in that position, then you really still have something here. You have a guy that can give you 18 points per game on really efficient shooting and be a total pain in the ass for defenses, especially on a team like the Pistons, where their guards outside of Jaden Ivey don't draw a lot of fouls. So that's a skill set right there that can absolutely help you and potentially open up shots for other guys as well. So no, I don't think any of us are saying we want to trade Saddiq Bey necessarily. I don't think any of us are saying it's time to give up on him. But yeah, certainly it's been disheartening to see where he has been this year.
Yeah, and, you know, ultimately, how surprising would it be if in the middle of December or January, whatever, he goes on a 8 to 12 game heater, and now his stock is back up. I mean, he just is that kind of player.
Yeah, exactly. He is that streaky kind of guy that can get hot for a month or two, and then maybe he can just kind of even out the rest of the season. You know, maybe he doesn't play as well as he did for that month or two, but he doesn't play as bad as he has for the first 22 games of the year. So yeah, I mean, and last thing I'll say on this, because we've talked about this for a while now. Saddiq Bey, you know, looking at the market for Saddiq Bey is fine. He is not the untouchable piece that some were claiming he was for whatever reason. But the Pistons should also absolutely not be selling low on a 23-year-old forward on a team that's going to be playing a lot of meaningless games the rest of the way this season and has tons and tons of minutes to give these guys to continue to develop and get better. So that's kind of my final point on that.
Yeah, and you guys have touched on it. We're not advocating to trade Saddiq Bey. He's also not an untouchable asset. Everybody has value in this league. We've talked about this before. I think we talked about it last year when we were talking about Grant. You know, everybody has some sort of value in this league. Actually, we may have been talking about it. We briefly maybe mentioned what we would trade for Victor Wembanyama. The key point is everyone has some sort of value in this league. It would be a mistake for the Pistons to look at his low counting stats and say, okay, we need to trade him immediately. That's the wrong way of going about it. But it is interesting that they're taking some calls, listening to what they value across the league is. I think this is no more than doing diligence as well. It's what good GMs do. You're supposed to see what is being offered to you. Jasper, I love the Bojan Bogdanovic, Saddiq Bey for John Collins, because that immediately fills a spot on the roster with with a good player, with a specific skill set that matches up very nicely with some of the other younger players. For whatever reason, Atlanta doesn't want to keep John Collins. Him and Miles Turner are just what can we throw at them to get them on a different team? It seems like for the last 3 years he's been in trade talks, maybe longer at this point, but that's the kind of trade that I would want if we're going to move somebody like Saddiq Bey, who was a building block with, I think he was the 19th overall pick. That's the kind of move that I would be hoping that the Pistons are looking at. And I do think Atlanta is one of those desperate teams that is kind of off to a middling start. I think the Miami Heat are another one of those teams that's kind of off to a weird kind of blast start. I don't know what assets you'd want from the Heat, but those are the kinds of teams that might be a little desperate to make a trade, and they might be willing to pony up, an additional pick or player to get a player like Saddiq and hope that they could fix him by the end of the year. Okay, let's go on to our stock report segment. Jasper, I'm going to let you go first, since I don't think you've done a stock report yet. This was kind of something we did last week. Go ahead, give us your stock up, stock down guys for the Pistons.
Yeah, I mean, just like myself in 2020, I'm new to the stock market. I have no idea what I'm doing, and I hope it works out, but I'm probably going to lose a lot of money. Did you invest in GameStop when it went nuts? I did not. I was a big Top Shot guy, and that actually turned out very well for me. Anyway, yeah, stock up. The fan favorite answer here is going to be Killian Hayes, but I have to go with another guy's. It's got to be Kevin Knox. He has played over his last 8 games, little under 19 minutes per game. I would say he's probably having his best stretch of professional basketball outside of Summer League. Look, in that 18.8 minutes per game, he is averaging 8.4 points on 53% shooting. And more importantly than that, 1.63 per games on 45% shooting from outside. He has been shockingly competent on defense. In fact, he's made some really important defensive plays. He had moments against Denver, Utah, and Phoenix, especially on that end, that were just huge defensive moments. He had that one block against Phoenix. He had that one steal against Utah. Those were fourth quarter end of game plays, and they were really huge for Detroit. He's played a huge factor in them winning 2 games against Denver and Utah that by all accounts they should not have won. On top of that, averaging half a turnover per game. So he's playing within himself. He's doing his job. The team plays reflected that. He's got the best on-off splits of anyone on the team in this stretch at plus 30.5 points per 100. Those are his on-off splits. That's just crazy. And it's not just because everyone else has been horrible when he's not playing. They're plus 11.5 points per 100 with him on the floor. He's been really effective at both ends. The offense has been good. The defense has been good. I mean, if we're talking stock up, Kevin Knox, stock up. If we're talking stock down, I hate to say it, considering that I was afraid. I think we all were afraid when he saw him suffer that injury against the Suns that his season was over. But I got to go Bojan Bogdanovic. Over the last 7 Pistons games, he's sat one of them, played 6. His on-off splits are -22. And the worst part of that is a defensive rating of 131.3 points per possession with him on the floor. That is just, I mean, it's inexcusable. It's atrocious. And even without last night's debacle against the New York Knicks, it still would be very bad. In those 6 games, yeah, he's getting his points, still close to 20 points per game, 48% shooting. That's all good. The bad part, though, is that he's only hitting 28% of his threes in that time span. So all of his scoring is really coming from inside the arc. And he's hitting less threes per game than Isaiah Livers, Jaden Ivey, Kevin Knox, and Killian Hayes in that span. 3 turnovers per game, 3.2 assists, 4 rebounds. And the thing about those turnovers is that it really feels like they're coming at the worst possible time because Dwayne Casey's forcing the ball into his hands during crunch time, which is just not a good skill for him. I mean, he's not a good isolation scorer. He's great at everything else. ISO is what he's bad at. And it makes no sense why Dwayne Casey continues to give him those possessions in those situations. It's nonsense. So yeah, my stock up, it's got to be Kevin Knox. He's playing the best basketball of his career. Stock down, it's got to be Bojan Bogdanovic. He's giving them production, but it's not the production they need. And the downsides of his game have just been absolutely atrocious over the last week and a half or so.
Aaron, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, and I'll start with my stock up being Marvin Bagley, which is ironic because Mike, you and I spent the first ever debut of the stock report stocking down Marvin Bagley, and then 3 games since that he's averaging 15 points, 9.7 rebounds. He's hitting just under 2 threes a game. Like, he's legitimately contributed to this team in the 3 games since last week's show. Gonna give him credit because obviously I didn't give him credit last week, and I'm a big enough man to give credit when credit's due. Marvin Bagley's played a lot better just in terms of doing what he's actually able to do. He still doesn't defend, but he is being the scoring big that he has been told that he is, and I'll give him credit. The efficiency, not great from inside the arc, 50%. You'd like to see that a little bit higher for a guy that plays, in the interior as much as Bagley does. But he's even knocking down some outside shots, something that he has not historically been good at. So I don't know if that'll stick. I doubt the rebounding sticks. But he played a good week of basketball, so I give him credit in that regard. And it would be great for the Pistons if he could continue to contribute at a high enough level, even with Isaiah Stewart now back in the fold, because man, they need some more help. And if Bagley can give them some strong minutes, that would certainly be a good thing, considering they paid him $40 million this past offseason.
And let's be realistic. If you didn't put him in the stock up and eat crow, then the commenters during next week's podcast would make sure that you did.
Right. I'm a big enough man to give him credit where credit's due. Absolutely.
Right. Okay. So how about stock down?
Stock down for me is Hamidou Diallo. He's seemingly out of the rotation now. Yesterday against the Knicks, before it became a blowout, he did not come in the game in the normal rotation. Kevin Knox was ahead of him in the rotation, and that's with Bojan Bogdanovic back, Saddiq Bey back, Isaiah Stewart back. Does Knox stay in the rotation with Ivy coming back in the fold here soon? I don't know, but it does seem like Hamidou Diallo is out of the rotation. I think it's I think it's the right decision. He's just not a great player. He'll give you some highlight plays. He'll have a game where he flirts with a double-double just because it's one of those wild up and down games where he gets a couple breakaway dunks, taps around a couple missed shots, and he ends up with 13 and 7. And you're like, wow, that was a productive game for Hamidou Diallo, but he's just a nightmare defensively. And I saw a tweet, I can't remember who it was from, but essentially just talked about how Hamidou Diallo plays in a way that makes the rest of the team on the court play bad because they start playing more wild, they start chasing stuff more, they get undisciplined, and that couldn't be more from the truth. So I think it's a good thing Diallo's out of the rotation, even if he gives you a couple really exciting highlight plays here or there. It's the right thing, and he just hasn't played well enough to earn a rotation spot. So stock down, you're out of the rotation. It's an easy pick for me.
Yeah, when your team is playing horribly and you need somebody to come in there and just create some chaos, Hamidou Diallo can absolutely do that for you. But yeah, it's true. I mean, whenever he's been given those extended minutes, it just inevitably is just too much. He's not that kind of guy. So no, I think I'm with you on that as well. Especially, like I said, since Kevin Knox has been playing so well.
Yeah. On that point, Jasper, you said that Kevin Knox is playing the best basketball of his career outside of the summer league. At what moment did you determine that this is it? He has crossed the threshold of his best basketball of his career, considering that has not been there's not a lot to take from.
Well, yeah, that's kind of it. I mean,
Right.
he's just literally never played this well. It's not like there's a whole ton of game film, but I mean, I've watched Kevin Knox play before. I don't think he's had a 8-game stretch I mean, I know he has not had an 8-game stretch like this ever in his professional basketball career. So it's very nice for him, and I'm happy for him because this is a guy that, let's be real, I mean, he's kind of gotten the campaign treatment where people are like, why is this guy in the league at all? Like, why?
That's
so
a great comparison.
He's showing a little bit of why he's in the league. He's, when he plays within himself and he hits shots, he can absolutely give you some useful things at both ends of the floor. And that defensive part of it, I mean, that's always, for his guy who is a shooter who has not shot well, the defensive end of the floor has always been his biggest issue. And I think he's done a very solid job defensively, all things considered. So I'm happy for him.
Well, we're very happy to see him playing well. And going third for the stock report means that there's inevitably duplicates. And my stock up was definitely Killian Hayes. And it's the low-hanging fruit, the easy pick. And I tweeted out that I'm ready to believe in him as the backup point guard of the future. His last 12 games, averaging 30 minutes a game, 11 points, 3.5 boards, 5.7 assists. He's shooting 41% from the floor, 36% from three, which is the more alarming thing. That's like, oh wow, maybe this is turning the corner. We've said that over the last couple of years of like a stretch of his play and thinking, oh, maybe he's turned the corner. Maybe the shot is here. His turnover percentage is 11.5%. And obviously the offense is not perfect, but he has shown considerable growth. And we talked about Killian Hayes, I think, on every podcast for the last 2 years. Aaron wrote a great article talking about, one of the things that was talked about was Killian Hayes' play with Cade Cunningham out. When you talk about evaluating players, he's right up there with Saddiq Bey. The Pistons have had to evaluate what they do have in Killian Hayes. And right now he's showing that he does have some juice. So let's hope that good play continues because we think, Cade's probably going to be out for the rest of the year. He's going to have plenty of opportunities to continue improving. He's going to get plenty of shot opportunities. So he's obviously a huge stock up. I think everybody has him in the stock up category. My stock down was also Bojan Bogdanovic because since that, I really thought he tore his ACL or had a significant knee injury. He has kind of cratered. At the beginning of the year, he was arguably the most impactful player on the team. Obviously, Cade's the best player, but Bogdanovic's ability to stretch the floor, something the Pistons have been searching for years, it seems. And Jeremy Grant ISOs. We didn't have to look at him anymore. Now Bogdanovic kind of glued himself to the corner, or he was able to hit threes. And throughout those first couple of games, it looked good. And since then, it has really taken a downturn. And he was also talked about in trade discussions as well. So, that's another guy that is going to have to be monitored, but he's a clear stock down kind of guy. Jasper, you've already listed off the stats, but clear stock up, stock down guys for me was Killian Hayes and Bojan Bogdanovic. I really like the Marvin Bagley one because we get to eat crow, and Aaron and I did have like 5 to 8 minutes just talking negative about Marvin Bagley, and maybe he's an avid listener or he has bugged both of our rooms somehow, but thanks. Immediately we're just quickly wrong with stock up and stock down. So thank you, Marvin. Speaking of stock up, stock down, and kind of more of the up, the Pistons competed pretty well on their West Coast road trip. They secured wins against the Nuggets and Jazz. The Jazz are kind of fading a little bit, but Nuggets still a quality team. Alec Burks' debut has bolstered the bench. He was my other candidate for stock up because he has clearly lifted the bench unit kind of how we thought. When we didn't have him earlier in the season, the Pistons were very clearly a negative on the bench. Their bench unit was one of the worst in the league. He's come in. He's a scorer. He has really locked down the bench. It's a lot more stable. It's not great, but it's really been stabilized. Saddiq Bey and Isaiah Stewart are back. Talked about Saddiq plenty. We talked about Bogdanovic avoiding a serious injury. He's only missed a handful of games. And Jaden Ivey, I think, should be back next game. He's missed 3 games with knee soreness. Overall, in the month of November, today's the last day of November, 3-12. The Pistons are 28th in plus minus, 26th in scoring. They're 27th in field goal percentage, 24th in 3-point percentage, which, again, they were one of the worst in the league last year. And they're 30th in assists per game. And, not having your starting point guard does impact that quite a bit. So, but the Pistons are showing more fight, particularly against some tougher teams on the West Coast. Are the Pistons quietly getting better, despite not having Cade Cunningham for most of those games, and probably not going to be having him for the rest of the year? Is this something that is just a flash in the pan, or are you seeing sustainable things from some of the guys on this team?
I don't know. I think it's a little facetious to say they're really getting better. They were 3-12 in the month of November. They had the second lowest win percentage of the month. And a lot of metrics point to them just being absolutely awful. Like, maybe they got better from being the worst team in the league to like the second or third worst team in the league. So I guess if, we're judging it on that sort of improvement, yeah, they're getting a lot better. But no, I mean, there are some things that are encouraging. Like, obviously those wins on the road against Denver and Utah were great things. Are they going to happen, consistently? No. What I will say is I think the Pistons are getting better from a standpoint of they have a very tough schedule. They are going through a very tough stretch in the schedule. This sets them up to be a better team down the line. They're playing a schedule that will make them better later in the season because they'll have gone through a very tough part of their schedule. The beginning of the season was Murderer's Row. The 6-game Western Conference road trip is Murderer's Row. That builds you up to weather the storm more as time goes on. And that will probably coincide with getting Stewart back, with getting Ivy back. We still don't know what's going on with Cade. It doesn't seem great there, but you're getting Stewart back now. Ivy's on the cusp of returning. Bogdanovic avoided what looked like it was going to be a potentially season-ending injury. So from that standpoint, I think they will get better. I don't think they were better in November or since that Western Conference road trip. Like, they got a pair of improbable wins. It happens every year. It just came at a very tough part of the schedule for Detroit against 2 solid teams. But I'm not sitting here like, oh man, that 3-12 month of November really instilled some confidence in me that this team is getting a lot better. Like, yay, they didn't get blown out by double digits in the last 10 games, except they then went out and got blown out by New York by 30, which is inevitable. The Pistons always lose to New York, so you just mark that as a loss every time you see them pop up on the schedule. But yeah, I don't feel great about that type of discussion because they really weren't better in November. So hopefully this builds them up to be better going forward. Hopefully, it's that you got through the toughest part now. You got through, the thickest part of the schedule, and it gets better from here because your schedule gets a little bit easier and you're getting healthier.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where I'm at too, Aaron. I mean, yeah, are they getting better? I suppose so. It would have been very difficult for them to have gotten worse.
Right.
And like, they literally were the worst team in the NBA for the first month of the season. So yes, I suppose it was slightly inevitable that they improve somewhat. I mean, it's hard for me to say because a big part of that comes with just like Alec Burks getting healthy was huge. Like, you had the worst scoring bench in the NBA, and now you no longer do. And Killian Hayes being able to give you decent production from your starting guard spot, and Alec Burks giving you the scoring from the second unit, it means that neither unit is completely cratering you every single game. So just based on that, they were kind of bound to get a little bit better. But yes, they are better. They are a little bit better, not much, but they certainly have improved from the worst team in the league to, like you said, like the third worst team in the league. I think the Spurs are worse. I don't know. Maybe Houston's worse. It doesn't. You're splitting hairs at that point. It's not really all that important. Overall, yes, they are getting a little bit better, but a big part of that has just come down to they got Alec Burks back, and Killian Hayes has improved from being a complete disaster to being a slightly above replacement level point guard. Like, let's be real. That's what you're getting. He's not an all-star, but he's definitely improved a lot, and I think that has buoyed both units. Having those little switches as well, where Saddiq Bey is coming off the bench and giving you a little bit more scoring there, and Isaiah Livers has played pretty well. I think they got a little better, but overall, no, not that much. It's going to be really hard to see exactly how much better this team can get until you have Cade and Jaden Ivey both back out on the floor. Until then, I think this is right around where you're going to be, and I think that's kind of what we expected coming into the season if you didn't have Cade Cunningham playing. So, yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it. They're better than the absolute disaster that they were, but I'd say they're still, not outperforming expectations coming into the season by any metric. So the numbers are they're not pretty. And the on-court product has left a lot to be desired. But in the context of it, even with that additional lens of Cade Cunningham's missed most of November, does that change your viewpoint on things? They have found a way to stay competitive despite not having their best player available, and they might not have him available the rest of the year. Does that kind of change how things are? Because, if you would have told me at the beginning of the year, Saddiq Bey, Isaiah Stewart, and Cade Cunningham are all hurt, how many games did the Pistons win in a 1 month period? I would have said -3. I would have said they would have definitely been, arguably had the worst lineup in the league. They did weather some of those injuries. Killian has played well, or at least, well relative to what we're used to out of him, which is fearing for our lives when he touches the ball. But he has played well, yes. As a backup point guard, he has put together some games and has demonstrated some skills that I think are very promising. So, does that lens change throughout, all the injuries? The Pistons have weathered a lot of injuries early here in the season. When you're missing Stewart, Bey, and Cade Cunningham, and Bogdanovich is out for a couple games too. Does that change your viewpoint at all?
Not for me personally. It's like, yeah, they've dealt with those injuries, but if we're trying to frame it as the Pistons are getting better, I don't think that's necessarily the right way to the right narrative to push. Like, you could say the Pistons are getting better at treading water, but they're still bottom of the league in every core metric that matters. So it doesn't change it for me. And, it's obviously unfortunate that they've had those injuries, but it kind of is what it is. Like, I don't really have a whole lot more to add on that. It's just like, I don't know. I'm seeing more people be like, oh, you got to take, the little bit of improvement where you can get it. And it's like, yeah, but they're 3 and 12.
Expectations.
and those wins came from guys like Alec Burks and Kevin Knox having, performances that they probably aren't gonna have again. So it's not like, it's Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren and all these young guys who are just rallying around one another and getting the Pistons to compete at a higher level. It's like, no, you've gotten some better performances from some of your older role players, and Killian Hayes has had a nice stretch. But that's really it. It's not like this is a lot of youth movement where it's like, okay, I can see it. These young guys are all starting to figure it out, and they're playing at a high level, and they're just starting to fight more like the Pistons did a couple of years ago. It's completely different from that. So, I can sit here and watch, Alec Burks and Marvin Bagley and Kevin Knox and Rodney Magruder play minutes, but like that's not gonna make me feel like the Pistons are turning a corner when they go 3-12 in a month.
No, nothing's changed about the way they play basketball, right? Just guys have hit some shots, and that's great, but like they still are what they are. Like they still can't rebound. They still don't have very good passing. They still don't have very good shooting. They still have terrible size. Like they still have the same issues. Marvin Bagley's not going to miss 2 shots over the span of 2 games all the time. Kevin Knox is not going to shoot 45% from 3 all the time. I like Alec Burks a lot. He is absolutely going to help this team as long as he's playing for them. But is he as great as he has played? Not quite. He's a really useful player, but like he's not a guy you want out there getting you 16 points per game. So yeah, for me, it's not meaningful market improvement in the way that they play basketball. It's just, some guys getting healthy and playing well. And sometimes it's as simple as that. But I'm not seeing anything here that's saying like, oh, well, long term, this is changing the outlook of the next few months. Like they're still, they are what they are. They're a bottom 5 team in the NBA.
Well, that's ending on a positive note.
Sorry.
We were very, very like negative that entire show. It did feel that way. I'll say it. I was just thinking that before you said that, Mike.
Yeah.
But
Jaden Ivey will be back probably soon. Maybe, I hope.
He's been questionable on the injury report for like the last 3 games. So you got to
say he's fine. I don't know.
I mean, at what point do you get worried?
If we're still talking about it on next week's podcast, then I'm getting
That's
worried.
A good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Or
Which means that well, I was going to say, hopefully that means that next week we can come back and we'll give a very positive podcast. So, it's the yin and yang.
Yes,
this too shall pass.
Let's hope. It will pass. And I'll go ahead and be the confident one and say that there are more encouraging things to talk about on next week's show. But for right now, you guys are right. I mean, you ended it on the appropriate discussion, which is, this team maybe has shown some blips of improvement, some particular players, but they're still a bottom 5 team in most key stats, and they're a bottom 5 team in the entire league right now. Hopefully we'll have more positivity for next week's show.
That's what Palace of Pistons After Dark is for. Or that's for fun.
I was just about to say,
this is for reality.
If you want more positivity, right? We are the grim reality of the Pistons, while Tim and Czar and Jasper and whoever they have their revolving cast of characters is going to be that they will keep it light. So listen to us, listen to them afterwards, until there's better things to talk about on the horizon. Fellas, anything else you want to add before we close out the show?
No, I mean, hopefully next week we're sitting here talking about how Jaden Ivey's back in the fold. Pistons have maybe stolen a win or 2, and Stewart has settled himself back in. Maybe Saddiq Bey's had a couple nice performances. I don't want to sit here and talk down on the team for an hour plus. I would love to sit here and talk about how this team is maybe turning some things around, and the young guys are finding their footing and this and that. But until then, I'm not going to sit here and try to paint a different picture than what it is right now.
Let me just do one last question before we wrap up. What do you think about Isaiah Livers at the 2, which was pulled out of the bag yesterday by Dwayne Casey?
Yeah, I'm cool with it. It works. Most 2s are like 6'6", 6'7" anyway, so it's fine with me. Maybe he's a little slow in terms of the foot speed, but like he looked fine to me last night. Relatively speaking, I mean, everybody was a disaster, so I have no issue with it. I think he's like Saddiq Bey. He can reasonably slide between 2 and 4. You're going to have issues kind of regardless, depending on the team around you. So, for me, it's fine. I'm cool with it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really have a major opinion on it until I see it more. Don't know how much more we'll get to see it with Ivy. Again, on the cusp of returning to be positive. But I mean, it's worth it at this point. You're 3 and you went 3-12 in the month of November. It's like, yeah, let's try something new here at this point.
We'll take that as a positive. We'll put that comment in the positive column as we wrap up this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast. I'd like to thank our sponsor, BetOnline. As always, if you'd like to get your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit at betonline.ag, be sure to use the promo code BLEAV. That's BLEAV for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. And hey, why don't you check out palaceofpistons.com? We do have some written content available there. Aaron just put up a great article sort of highlighting a lot of the things that have been happening with the Pistons lately. We've talked about Killian Hayes. We've talked about Cade Cunningham's injury. The Pistons are going to have a big decision to make about sitting him. So head on over to the website, peruse, see any of the written content that we have available. It really helps us out a lot as well. We'd love to see that engagement on the written side of things as well. So for my co-hosts, Aaron Johnson and Jasper Apollonia, I am Mike Anguilano. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of the Palace of Pistons podcast, part of the Believe Network, and we will see you all next time.